yeah, I should win just because you had the Timberwolves in the 8th seed.
Vasilevsky's been playing really well, and the Lightning have a great offense.
Yeah, it was a tremendous shot, and I've come to expect it from LeBron. I would say I wish the best for the Red Sox, but as a Yankees fan, that's really hard for me to do.
The biggest addition to me is Jalen Brunson.
Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, and that's all I have to say. He's still a top 5 quarterback in this league, and there's nothing really anyone can do about it.
Why'd you have to name him? Like, seriously? Like, thanks, man.
Who would have thought 5 years ago that the Clippers and Nets would be facing in the finals?
How is Joe Burrow going to get the ball to them if his butt is already on the ground?
Crazy. And for the fans at home,
Hello, I'm Cy Mendenhall, and you're listening to Outsiders Opinions with Kevin and Austin.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to our NFL Opinions of the Week. Today, we're going to be talking about some fantasy, and the man that I am not currently competing with on fantasy this year, Austin.
Yeah, that'd be a good battle. We've done it before, but not this year.
Yeah, and I think fantasy's fun, but I also don't think I'm good at it because I feel like if you think a good player is good, like I love Deuce Vaughn, I think he's gonna be good, but he's not gonna, in my opinion, do well for fantasy. So it's difficult for me to figure that out.
Yeah, it's very, very hard for people, and myself included sometimes, to evaluate players separately. For example, Justin Herbert's really struggled in fantasy, but I still have him as the third best QB in the league. So if I want a QB, he'd be my third choice. But in fantasy, he wouldn't be, because fantasy includes rushing yards and the fact that passing touchdowns are only worth 4, but rushing touchdowns are worth 6 in most leagues. And you really have to kind of divvy up your expectations for players differently, because they are not necessarily, just because a player is a good fantasy player does not mean they're a good NFL player, and vice versa.
Yeah, so my question to you is, how do you feel about George Pickens? Because I feel he's a really good wide receiver, but I don't know how well he's going to do in fantasy.
Pickens is a guy I'm a lot higher on in fantasy, at least recently, mainly because I think his talent is there, and I believe in Kenny Pickett this next year. They keep bringing back Canada as the offensive coordinator, so I think he'll be used. I also think that he may jump Deontay Johnson as a wide receiver 1 this year. We'll see if that does happen. But he definitely gets less value in fantasy than I think he deserves, and for an understandable reason, because of Kenny Pickett and the fact that the offense has not been all that great the past couple of years.
Okay, that makes me feel better because with fantasy this year, I try not to draft the same guys in case I'm wrong, but I did end up getting Pickens in both of my drafts that I've done. So,
Got it.
but
How
he's
do
more
you
of a
go into-
sleeper.
Say again.
He's more of my sleeper guy. I'm like, just in case, and if it works out, it works out.
Okay. How do you go into a draft? Do you go into a draft saying, I'm going to go running back, receiver, or I'm going to go receiver, quarterback? Or is there a certain order that you like to go, or is it kind of best available?
I think with first round especially, I didn't go running back. I tried that last year, didn't work out. I thought I was getting good value, but it didn't really work. So I went wide receiver, and in one of my drafts, I got to pick my pick, and I chose number 11, which I think someone was messing me with about it, but I was like, nah, I have a plan, and I feel I came out well with it because it was a keeper league too, so I wouldn't have gotten Jefferson, because I was like the second people to pick their pick. But I went 11 and I got Debo. And then the next guy I got is Joe Burrow because other guys had kept their quarterback. So that's something different with keeper wise. But I was pretty high up, and I believe I went wide receiver first just in another draft.
Okay.
Just because I drafted Tyreek Hill because I like Tyreek Hill and I think he'll do well.
Hill's a very good pick. What's crazy is I went Hill in my first draft. So I definitely like that. But I usually go running back first round, or at least one of the first 2, because that's a position that is very important, but it's not as important as the wide receivers. And you can get some wide receivers late, especially in ESPN drafts. So I try to go running back early. My thing is really with tight end. There's like a couple different tiers of tight end, and if you're not getting Kelsey, you can kind of push down a couple of the guys because it only makes up one roster spot. And then I see a lot of people say they don't like kickers, or they like kickers, or they don't like defenses, or they like defenses. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't really care. My defense, I did go Cowboys this year for one league. One league doesn't have defense, but yeah, I do go running back second round because I just feel first round running back, especially in fantasy, is very volatile. But I am happy with my running back room. I got a keeper league, so I kept Derrick Henry. But in another one, I got Aaron Jones, which I'm pretty excited about. I feel he's a solid pick.
Yeah, and I think a good thing as well with defenses and kickers is just to get a guy, unless you get like Younghoe Koo or Daniel Carlson, which I got, or Justin Tucker, a guy that's going to be very productive, I think, all year or for most weeks, is at least for defenses for me. I try to go by matchup base. For example, I got the Panthers, and that's because their early season schedule I think is very advantageous, and they have a good defense. I don't think they have a top 5 defense or even a top 7 defense, but I do think that the defense is good enough. They'll get turnovers early in the year, and so I can kind of turn that into some momentum. And then if their matchups get harder and I don't think they can play as well, I'll just pick up somebody off the waivers. And I do think the waivers are very important to how I look at building a fantasy team and a fantasy league winner.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Yeah, I went Cowboys defense because I think they're going to be one of those top defenses, and I kind of just wanted to have my defense set instead of going that matchup based. So I may have drafted one early, but I was also like back to back, so I like that too because I get to see what's happening and then make a decision on what I want to before anyone. I kind of had to predict, okay, what are these other people going to do before I do it.
In drafts, do you ever see a guy you want, but you're like, no, I can wait because you know how your league mates draft?
Yes. So one I'm in is a bunch of Clemson people. So I was like, okay, any Clemson person I want is gonna be gone.
T.
But
Higgins.
yeah, I think T Higgins was a keeper, but somehow I got Hunter Renfrow, and that's a guy I want to ask. Why are in another draft Hunter Renfrow was this? I was in the last round. I was like, Hunter Renfrow's available. I'll take him. I don't.
Yeah, he struggled last year. I don't really know why he's going so low. I do think he has some potential, especially as a slot receiver, and he has a very high catch percentage. I do think it's interesting that a lot of people are passing on him, but I think it's partially he started last year. They don't like Josh McDaniels as a head coach, and they don't like Jimmy Garoppolo as a QB. That all compounds to the fact he's also not the wide receiver one. But I do think he should be going higher than where he goes.
Yeah, I think he's going to be productive because if I'm thinking of Garoppolo, because the wide receivers they traded Darren Waller. I know they got that rookie tight end, I think.
Michael Mayer.
Yeah, the Notre Dame guy. But to me, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to really feed into Renfrow. I think Adams' production is going to go lower. But Adams is still the best wide receiver in the league. But I just think Garoppolo is going to go more short-term yardage.
Yeah, I could easily see that as a possibility. And I think Jefferson could pass Adams as the best wide receiver in the league this year. We'll have to see. But I still agree that Adams is the best for what he did last year. But I do think when you get up there in the draft, like up there meaning like very, very high picks, it does get very difficult because if you miss, the stakes of missing are very high. For example, you take like last year, Jonathan Taylor was the 101, meaning the first pick in the most of the drafts, and he missed half the season, or basically half the season. So that pick destroyed a lot of teams, and where in a lot of other drafts, if you went Chase like I did third, he was amazing all year, but then he got hurt. So there's a lot of picks where it's not necessarily wasting a pick because you made a good pick, but those could always come back to bite you because of injury or regression or something else. So with those top picks, you really do have to be very careful.
Yeah, I agree. And to go back to your original question on a guy that I think I could fall back was George Pickens. I think it's a lot of wide receiver. I used to think running back, but to me, running back's very divided. So some guys may take him high. Zeke for me this year was a guy I was like, I can grab him. He's in both my leagues, but he was a guy I'm like, people are going to be down on him, but I do think this is going to happen. But for me, probably it's wide receiver. You can wait on one wide receiver, especially if it's a guy like Pickens. I almost want to say Amon-Ra St. Brown is underrated almost in fantasy as a wide receiver because I feel he's very consistent.
Yeah, he was the wide receiver 10 last year according to or by points. So I definitely think he's a very talented receiver. It's just he's the only guy in Detroit right now because of injuries or suspensions. So the next best guy is Marvin Jones, who's really fallen off a good bit. We'll see if he can perform. Hopefully he will this year because I have him in some of my drafts. But I do think that Amon-Ra could be heavily guarded by the other team because of the lack of talent in the wide receiver pool on the Lions.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Or good. I agree. And but yeah, I think it's a lot of wide receivers because you can find one pretty easily. Like Christian Watson probably won't be drafted too high this year.
You think Christian Watson is getting taken too high?
No. I don't think he's going to be taking too high. So I think he's a guy you
Oh.
could get later in rounds, and he'll probably do pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, I think he is going pretty high in some drafts and not high in other drafts. It really just does depend. You need to know who you're drafting with and know
Yeah.
kind of who they like, who they don't like. Like you said, the Clemson fans. If there's a guy that you know knows more about one team or knows more about a certain type of player or a college or something like that, I do think you have to be a lot more careful. For example, I was drafting with one of my friends, and he's very quarterback heavy for some reason. So in the first round, which is a crazy pick, he drafted Mahomes, which you're never supposed to really draft a QB that high. But then in the fourth round, he drafted Lamar. So he has Lamar and Mahomes. You can only start one QB. This is a one QB league, and he has Mahomes and Lamar. So it really does. Knowing that, I had to go Jalen Hurts in the third round, I believe. So I could make sure I get a quarterback because if I wait, the guys I draft with will take all the good ones.
That's actually funny because one person I with, he went Mahomes second round, but it was early in the second round, and I was like, okay, my pick's coming up. Someone took Josh Allen, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take Jalen Hurts because I don't really trust, and that's why I went high with Joe Burrow too in my other draft because after him it was Dak, Kirk, and those are good options, but I wasn't gonna pick for a while. So I'm like, if it goes quarterback round, I could be not at the right quarterback. So I went with Joe Burrow, even though I'm scared about his injury, but to me, he's still better than Dak and Kirk in fantasy.
How do you try to stack players, or do you try to stack players?
Like drafting same position.
No, stacking is when two players are on the same team. So, for example, I made a stack in my one because I went AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts. That's a stack.
Gotcha. Yeah, I try to not do too much of it, but sometimes if they're there, because in one draft I drafted Debo, and someone was like, "Oh, you should get Ayuk," and I'm like, "No, I'm not doing Ayuk because then my wide receiver's out, and then I have two wide receiver spots out." But maybe quarterback, wide receiver. I think that could be a good combo, like you said. You had AJ Brown and Jalen.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so that's just great. I would say running back, wide receiver, probably good. I think you got to be careful because if they're two productive guys, then you're going to lose those in your bye week.
Yeah, I understand that. It really does. You do have to get past the bye week. I do think for playoff stacks are very valuable because if one player goes off in the playoffs, that usually means the other one does because it was a high scoring game or something else, especially if it is a QB wide receiver duo, which is why I did Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown because I feel like if one succeeds, the other one will just by default. I also could see running back, wide receiver working or even two wide receiver sets, but those I think are harder. Unless you do have elite guys at both spots. Like, for example, on one of my teams, I have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I just think those two are so good that it'll overcome a lot of other deficits.
Yeah, I think that's a good duo too. One, if that I say wouldn't work, would be if you did CD Lamb and Brandon Cooks. I don't think that would work. Or AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I don't really believe too much in Devontae Smith.
I still think Devontae Smith will be very productive. I don't have Smith on that one draft, but I do understand why you're saying that he won't be as productive, but Smith is still very talented.
Oh yeah, he's great. I love him as a wide receiver. I'm just thinking Waddle and Hill to me is a great duo, and I'm cool having them on the same team because they'll still be both productive. I'm just not sure about the other guys that I
That's
mentioned.
true. It's really going to depend on how much the Eagles pass the ball and really how they form that offense. Because if they do pass the ball a lot, I could see them both having a great year. But if they don't, then it'll probably just be AJ Brown having the more successful weeks than Devontae Smith.
Yeah, so hopefully this helps you in fantasy, or you may be regretting some decisions. But any final thoughts, Austin?
No.
All right, that's all we got. Thank you for listening to Outsiders Opinions, and make sure to follow us on socials.